Chapter 1. The Legend of Lonar Hill. In the heart of India, nestled among dense forests and undulating plains, lies a place whispered about only in hushed tones, a desolate mountain that locals call Lonar Hill. It stands isolated, rising abruptly from the flat lands as if it were thrust from the earth by some forgotten hand. From afar, the hill appears almost peaceful, a gentle giant covered with a blanket of mist that lingers even under the burning sun, as if the very air around it carries an unsettling secret. But within the villages scattered at its base, Lonar Hill is no ordinary landmark. It is a place surrounded by stories passed down through generations, too strange, too eerie, and too terrifying for most to comprehend. To the people who live in its shadow, the hill is more than just a geographical feature. It is a living thing, an entity that watches, listens, and judges those who dare venture too close. The Curse of Lonar Hill has been part of the village's folklore for centuries, a chilling tale passed from one elder to the next. It is said that long ago, a powerful and deeply sorrowful sorcerer lived in the small village at the foot of the hill. His name has been lost to time, but his story is immortalized in the memories of the villagers, who recall his extraordinary skills in magic, his boundless love for his wife, and his tragic fall from grace. In his youth, the sorcerer was a man of immense charm and wisdom, sought after by kings and commoners alike for his ability to heal, protect, and even glimpse into the future. But his greatest joy came from his marriage to a woman named Vandana. She was the beauty of the village, with eyes as bright as the stars and a heart as pure as the sacred rivers that flowed through the land. Together they shared a life of peace and prosperity, far removed from the troubles of the outside world. It was said that their love was so powerful, it created a kind of magic all its own, one that seemed to make everything around them bloom. But magic, like love, is a fickle thing. One fateful night, as the sorcerer and Vandana walked beneath a sky full of twinkling stars, a group of raiders descended upon the village. They were ruthless men from distant lands, driven by greed and hunger for power. Their weapons were sharp, their hearts harder. The sorcerer tried to protect his wife, using his magic to shield the village, but his powers were no match for the overwhelming force of the invaders. Amid the chaos, Vandana was struck down by a sword meant for the sorcerer. In her dying breath, she whispered his name, calling to him as the world around her crumbled. Devastated by her death, the sorcerer fell into madness. Grief turned to rage, and he vowed to do whatever it took to bring Vandana back, even if it meant bending the very fabric of reality. He spent years searching for an ancient ritual, one that would allow him to breach the boundaries between life and death. But what the sorcerer failed to realize was that some boundaries should never be crossed. The more he delved into forbidden magic, the more he became consumed by darkness. Desperate to see his wife once more, the sorcerer finally found what he sought, a ritual said to resurrect the dead. But there was a cost, a dark pact that required the soul of another in exchange for bringing back the one lost. The sorcerer, blinded by his grief, agreed to the price. He began the ritual, standing atop the highest peak of the hill, surrounded by symbols of power and ancient curses. But as the final words of the incantation left his lips, the earth itself seemed to shudder. The air turned cold, and the spirits of the forest stirred uneasily. The sorcerer, expecting the sweet reunion with his beloved, was instead met with a horrible, twisted version of her. Her form returned, but not her soul. What stood before him was a hollow imitation, a wraith-like shadow of the woman he had loved. In his madness, he had not summoned her soul, but a malevolent force that now sought to possess him. Unable to control the unleashed spirit, the sorcerer's once beautiful hill became a prison, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were blurred. His regret turned into a curse that spread over the land. The hill itself became a place of darkness, where the souls of the lost wandered aimlessly, trapped between worlds. From that moment on, those who ventured near Lonar Hill would never return. Some claimed to hear whispers in the wind, faint voices calling for help. Others swore they saw shadows moving among the trees, or felt an oppressive, suffocating weight in the air. Livestock would disappear, and crops would wither for no reason at all. The villagers, once proud and prosperous, began to dwindle, their lives shadowed by the curse that had taken root on the hill. It is said that the sorcerer, in his desperation, vanished into the very hill, trapped for all eternity, tormented by the soul he had tried to bring back. His spirit, now twisted and corrupted, is believed to haunt the hill to this day, waiting for someone foolish enough to free him from his eternal prison, or to join him in his torment. But there is one thing that is certain: Lonar Hill is no ordinary mountain. It is a place where the past and present collide, where grief, rage, and regret have transformed it into a cursed ground that no one dares to approach. And yet, as time passes, people continue to be drawn to it, seeking answers to the unanswered questions, or perhaps unknowingly walking toward their doom. The villagers know the danger, yet they still speak of the hill, not out of fear, but out of the inexplicable compulsion that every human feels when they hear of a mystery too great to ignore. The curse may have settled on the hill centuries ago, but its grip still holds tight, and those who seek to uncover its secrets might find that they, too, are caught in its web. Chapter 2. The Curious Traveler. It was a crisp autumn morning when Arjun, a young traveler with an unyielding thirst for adventure, arrived at the village at the base of Lonar Hill. He had heard the whispers of the cursed hill from a fellow traveler in a distant town, a passing remark about the hill where the dead never rest that had stirred something within him. He had always been drawn to the unexplained, to the places where the veil between reality and legend was thin, and Lonar Hill seemed like the perfect challenge. Arjun was not the type to be deterred by warnings. As a child, he had heard stories of haunted places, of spirits that roamed forgotten castles and empty mansions, and those tales had only fueled his curiosity. He was not afraid of ghosts or curses. To him, they were part of the great unknown, the mystery that made life worth living. Armed with a backpack, a camera, and a notebook filled with sketches and scribbled notes from his travels, Arjun arrived in the sleepy village, unaware of how much his life was about to change. The village was a quiet place, far removed from the bustle of the cities. The streets were narrow, with stone houses and simple, weather-beaten doors that seemed to have stories of their own. Arjun passed through the cobbled lanes, his eyes scanning the people who moved in the morning haze. The villagers were mostly older, their faces etched with the hard lines of experience. The children played in the dirt roads, their laughter echoing through the air, but there was an unmistakable heaviness in the atmosphere. The air seemed thicker here, as though the village had been holding its breath for years, waiting for something. His first stop was the village tavern, a modest structure with wooden beams and a crackling fire inside. The scent of spices and fresh bread lingered in the air as Arjun pushed open the door. Inside, a handful of villagers sat at the long wooden tables, talking in low voices. The firelight flickered across their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. As Arjun entered, the conversations momentarily paused, and all eyes turned toward him. It was the sort of look that said, "You don't belong here." "New face," muttered an old man sitting at the far end of the room. His voice was rough, like gravel being ground underfoot. Arjun nodded and walked toward the counter where the innkeeper, a stout woman with a kind but wary face, stood wiping down a glass. "Tea?" she asked, her voice laced with a softness that did not match the tension in the room. "I'm looking for information about the hill," Arjun said, leaning slightly forward, his curiosity already getting the better of him. At the mention of Lonar Hill, the room seemed to tighten, as if the words themselves had disturbed something dormant. The innkeeper's hands faltered for a moment before she continued with her task, her eyes avoiding his. "You're better off not asking about it," she said, her tone flat and final. "People don't speak of it here. Not if they know what's good for them." Arjun felt the chill in her words, but he was undeterred. "I've heard stories, legends, curses. People claim the hill is haunted, but no one ever talks about it in detail." A heavy silence descended over the tavern, and several of the villagers looked at one another, as though deciding whether to intervene. Finally, one man, older than the rest, stood up and limped toward Arjun. He was tall, with a long, grizzled beard and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of countless storms. "If you value your life, young man," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "don't go near that hill. It's cursed, sure as the sun will rise. Folks say the souls of the lost still wander there, and no one who's gone up has ever returned the same. Some say they come back, but they're never really the same." Arjun raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the old man's ominous tone. "What do you mean? You think it's just superstition?" The man's eyes darkened. "Superstition. Maybe. Or maybe there's more to it than you think. The hill has a history. Things happen there that no one can explain. People who go up there hear voices, see things that aren't there. But the worst part is that some say the hill, it calls to you. And once you hear it, you can't leave." The room grew even quieter as the man spoke, and the innkeeper stopped wiping glasses, her gaze focused on the floor. Arjun, however, was not the type to back down. "But what's really happened? Why is it cursed?" The old man sat back down, shaking his head slowly. "No one knows the full story. There was a man, long ago before any of us were born. Sorcerer. A man who loved a woman more than anything. They say he tried to bring her back from the dead. And the price he paid, well, it's the reason that hill is what it is now. The curse is tied to his grief, his rage. But it's more than that. The hill is alive in its own way. And it doesn't want to be forgotten." The words hung in the air, thick with foreboding. Arjun's heart raced. He could feel it now, the allure of the hill pulling at him, the sense that there was something far greater at play here, something beyond the scope of mere superstition. "I don't believe in curses," Arjun said, trying to dismiss the unease creeping up his spine. "But I do believe in mysteries." The old man gave a grim smile. "Then you'll learn soon enough. Just remember this. Some mysteries are meant to stay unsolved." As Arjun left the tavern, the chill in the air seemed to follow him. He looked up at Lonar Hill, now looming above the village in the fading light of the day, its silhouette sharp against the horizon. It was as if the hill itself was watching him, waiting for him to make the next move. He felt no fear. Instead, there was a sense of excitement, a deep, almost visceral need to uncover the secrets buried within its ancient stone. He had always sought out the unexplained, the hidden, and now it seemed that his greatest adventure had just begun. But the villagers were right about one thing. The hill called to him. Chapter 3. The Forbidden Path. The sun dipped behind the distant mountains, casting the village into a soft twilight haze. Arjun stood at the edge of the village, gazing up at Lonar Hill, its mist swirling like a cloak around its peak, almost as if the mountain itself were hiding something. The chill in the air deepened as evening fell, and the shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground, twisting unnaturally in the growing darkness. He could feel it now, the irresistible pull of the hill. The stories, the warnings, the ominous words of the villagers, all of it only added to the allure. For Arjun, the more they spoke of danger, the more compelling the hill became. He had heard enough of its cursed history to understand that this wasn't going to be an ordinary adventure. The mystery of Lonar Hill wasn't just another ghost story or folklore. It was real, and it was waiting for someone like him to unlock its secrets. With a quick glance back at the village, Arjun tightened the straps of his backpack, which contained a flashlight, a notebook, a map, and his trusty camera. He knew the villagers didn't want him to go up there. They had made that abundantly clear. But the fact that they feared the hill only made him more determined. There was something about the way they spoke, the fear that laced their words, that hinted at something beyond their control. This was no ordinary place, and he couldn't turn away from it now. The path leading to the hill was rough, overgrown with thick vines and hidden beneath a blanket of fallen leaves. Arjun's boots crunched on the ground as he made his way through the underbrush, his mind racing with the possibilities of what lay ahead. The trees were dense, their twisted branches stretching out like fingers, as if trying to prevent him from getting any closer. The further he walked, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the air itself thickened, the sounds of the village fading behind him, replaced by an eerie stillness. The deeper he ventured into the woods, the more he felt a presence around him. It wasn't overt. There were no ghostly apparitions or sounds of footsteps following him, but it was there, just beneath the surface. A feeling of being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and his pulse quickened. He paused, glancing over his shoulder, but saw nothing. The forest, silent and still, gave no clue as to what he was sensing. Still he pressed forward. After an hour of walking, the path narrowed and became steeper, forcing Arjun to climb over large rocks and twisted roots. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, sending a shiver down his spine. It was then that he spotted something unusual, an old weathered stone archway, half hidden by vines and moss, standing alone in the middle of the path. It looked ancient, as though it had been erected centuries ago. Curious, Arjun approached the arch. Its surface was covered with strange symbols and markings, none of which he recognized. They seemed to pulse with an energy he couldn't quite place, as if they were alive, waiting for someone to decode their meaning. The stone seemed to hum faintly under his fingers as he reached out to touch it, and for a brief moment, he felt a rush of cold air, as though something beyond the arch was breathing, waiting. He hesitated but then stepped through the arch. The moment he did, the temperature dropped. The air around him grew thick, almost suffocating. The sounds of the forest seemed to fall away entirely. The only noise was the distant howl of the wind, and even that sounded muffled, as though the hill had swallowed the rest of the world whole. The path continued beyond the arch, but it no longer felt like a normal trail. It was as if he had crossed into another realm. The trees here were older, twisted and gnarled, their trunks blackened as if scorched by fire. The sky above had taken on a strange hue, a pale, sickly green that cast an unsettling glow over everything. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant snap of a twig. Arjun's heart pounded in his chest, but his curiosity kept him moving forward. Every step felt heavier, as though the hill itself was trying to hold him back, to make him second-guess his decision. But Arjun was resolute. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. As he walked deeper into the forest, the path grew narrower, and the trees closer together. The light from his flashlight barely pierced the gloom, and the shadows seemed to move and shift, playing tricks on his eyes. His breath came in shallow gasps, and the air grew colder with each passing moment. It was then that he heard it, a faint whisper just barely audible, coming from the darkness ahead. It sounded like a voice, but it was distorted, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. His heart skipped a beat, and he froze, listening intently. Arjun! The voice was unmistakable, but it wasn't the voice of a person. It was something else. A hollow, eerie sound that sent a chill crawling up his spine. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the wind. But the voice came again, clearer this time. Arjun! Come closer. His blood ran cold. He wasn't sure why, but the voice felt familiar. Too familiar. It called to him, pulling him forward, urging him deeper into the forest. Against his better judgment, Arjun stepped forward, drawn by the compulsion in the voice. With each step, the air grew heavier, colder. The trees loomed over him like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. And then, just as he thought he couldn't go any further, he saw it, a clearing up ahead, bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient stone structure, partially crumbled, its shape barely visible in the dim light. The symbols etched into the stones pulsed with an ethereal glow, and the ground around it was cracked and uneven, as though the earth itself had been torn apart. This was it, the heart of the hill, the place where the sorcerer's magic had once torn the fabric of life and death. This was the place where the curse had been born. Arjun stepped into the clearing, feeling a strange weight on his chest, as if the very air around him was thick with the echoes of something long buried. He could hear the whispers now, louder, more insistent. The ground beneath his feet felt unstable, as if it might collapse at any moment. And then suddenly the whispering stopped. A cold silence descended, more oppressive than before. Arjun's breath hitched, and he looked around frantically. Something was wrong. He felt a shift, a change in the atmosphere, like the very earth had tilted beneath him. The hill, it seemed, had noticed him. Chapter 4. The Awakening. The silence in the clearing was deafening. It pressed down on Arjun like a heavy weight, suffocating him, as though the air itself was thick with centuries of hidden secrets. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat reverberating through his body, as if the earth itself was sinking with his fear. The strange, pulsating glow from the ancient stones had grown stronger, casting long shadows across the clearing, and now the ground beneath his feet felt alive. Arjun stood frozen, every instinct in him telling him to turn and run, yet his legs refused to obey. It was as if something was anchoring him to the spot, holding him captive in the center of the eerie glow. His flashlight flickered once, then twice before going completely dark. He cursed under his breath, fumbling to turn it back on, but the device refused to cooperate. Panic gripped him. He had no choice now but to rely on the unnatural light that filled the clearing. And as his eyes adjusted to the glow, the shapes around him began to take form. The ruins in the center were not just random stones. They were the remnants of an ancient temple, weathered and crumbling, but unmistakably deliberate in their design. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the ground, faint at first but growing louder with every passing second. Arjun's eyes darted to the center of the stone structure, where the pulsating light was now brighter, almost blinding. The air shifted again, and the temperature dropped so sharply that he could see his breath, hanging in the air like a wisp of smoke. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form cloaked in the darkness that seemed to pour from the very stones. The figure moved with an unnatural fluidity, its outline distorted by the flickering light. Arjun took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to flee, but he was paralyzed, as if the ground itself had taken root beneath his feet. Who are you?" Arjun whispered, his voice hoarse, barely above a breath. But the figure didn't answer. It simply floated closer, its presence cold and heavy like a storm about to break. And then the voice came again. This time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a deep, resonant tone like the voice of the hill itself, a sound that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. "Why have you come?" The question was not one of curiosity. It was a command, a demand for an answer that Arjun wasn't sure how to give. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his racing heart. I came to learn," Arjun stammered, his mind swirling with confusion. "I heard the stories, the legends. I needed to understand." The figure moved closer, its presence now overwhelming, suffocating him with its coldness. It was taller than any man, shrouded in a dark mist that seemed to swirl and shift around it, obscuring its true form. The voice returned, this time more insistent, more powerful. "You seek knowledge, traveler," it intoned, "but knowledge comes at a price." Arjun's chest tightened. This wasn't just a haunted hill, he realized. This was something much older, much more dangerous. The curse was not just a story. It was alive, breathing, waiting for someone to unlock its terrible secret. He had already crossed a threshold, one that could never be undone. I don't understand," Arjun whispered, his throat dry. "What price?" The figure raised a hand, if it could be called a hand, and the air around it shifted once more. The trees groaned, their limbs creaking as if in response. Arjun could feel the earth beneath him tremble, and he feared the ground would crack open at any moment, swallowing him whole. "You seek to understand the curse," the figure said, its voice now filling the air around them. "But to understand, you must first become part of it." Before Arjun could react, the ground before him cracked open, splitting wide in a jagged line. From the crack emerged a glowing, pulsing root, twisting and writhing like a serpent, its tendrils reaching toward him. It was the same dark energy that had filled the air when he first arrived at the hill, now manifesting as something tangible, something real. A surge of fear shot through Arjun. This was no longer a mystery. It was a nightmare, and he was trapped in its grip. He tried to back away, but the darkness seemed to have enveloped him, pulling him in with every step he took. "Run," he muttered to himself. "Run." But it was no use. His body refused to move. The figure's voice echoed once more, sending a wave of cold dread through his heart. "You cannot escape the curse, traveler," it said, its tone low and terrifying. The hill has chosen you. And now you will become part of its story, its endless cycle of death and rebirth. As the root continued to slither toward him, Arjun's mind raced. He tried to think of a way out, some escape, some means to break free from the hill's unrelenting grip. But there was nothing, no escape from the curse that had taken root here long ago. Suddenly, a thought struck him like a bolt of lightning. The ritual, the sorcerer's ritual, the ancient magic that had bound this place to the curse. Perhaps, just perhaps, if he could reverse it, if he could find a way to destroy the dark force at the heart of the hill, he could break free. He forced his legs to move, propelled by a sudden surge of determination. As the tendrils reached for him, he darted to the side, his hand grabbing at the nearby stone structure. He stumbled, almost falling into the fissure that had opened in the earth, but managed to steady himself. "How do I stop this?" he shouted into the darkness, his voice breaking. "Tell me, how do I end it?" The figure did not respond. Instead, it raised both hands to the sky, and the ground trembled beneath Arjun's feet. The hill itself seemed to awaken, its pulse growing stronger, faster. The whispers that had once been faint now roared in his ears, drowning him in a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once. "Find the key. Find the sorcerer's last curse. And break it." The voices merged into one, and then everything fell silent. The figure was gone, and all that remained was the sound of Arjun's heavy breathing, the pulse of the hill, and the haunting knowledge that he had only just begun to understand the curse that gripped Lonar Hill. Chapter 5: The Sorcerer's Secret. Arjun stood alone in the clearing, the oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The wind, which had once howled through the trees, now seemed to hold its breath. The light from the ancient stone structure dimmed, leaving only the eerie, fading glow of the fissure in the earth. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was racing faster. What had just happened? The mysterious figure had disappeared, leaving him with only one cryptic message: "Find the key. Find the sorcerer's last curse, and break it." What did it mean? Arjun glanced around, searching for any sign that might lead him to understanding. The stone structures seemed ancient, their surfaces worn smooth by time, but their markings were clear. Strange symbols carved into the stone, some familiar to him, some foreign, pulsed with an energy that was undeniable. It was like the very stones were alive, as though they could feel his presence. Suddenly he heard it again. A whisper, faint at first, but then louder, clearer, like a voice just on the edge of his consciousness. The key. The key is hidden, in the heart of the hill, where the past and present converge. Arjun's blood ran cold. The voice was different this time, fainter, but it carried with it the weight of centuries. The sensation that the hill itself was speaking to him was not something he could ignore. Key. It was real, and it was here. The words haunted him, and as he listened closely, they became more distinct. Find the heart of the hill. The heart of the hill. What could that mean? Was there a hidden chamber beneath the stones? A place forgotten by time? A new sense of urgency gripped him. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about survival. He had to find the key, the source of the curse, and break it before it consumed him too. He couldn't be like the others, the ones who had ventured here before him and disappeared without a trace. The voices in his head were becoming louder now, and he could feel their presence around him, whispering warnings, beckoning him deeper into the heart of the hill. Arjun turned away from the ruined temple and scanned the surrounding forest. The path he had taken was no longer visible, swallowed by the dense, ancient woods. The trees around him twisted unnaturally, their gnarled limbs forming shapes that seemed to shift with every blink. The forest felt alive in a way he couldn't explain, as if the very earth under his feet was watching him, waiting for him to make his next move. His eyes caught a glimmer of something, a faint light beyond the trees. His breath caught in his throat. Could it be? He moved toward it, his steps quickening. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as though the hill was trying to guide him, or perhaps trap him. He couldn't be sure anymore. The light led him to the base of a massive, twisted tree. Its trunk was wider than any he had ever seen, and its roots stretched out like veins across the ground. Arjun stood before it, entranced by the energy emanating from the tree. There was something about it, something that felt ancient, alive, and deeply connected to the hill itself. At the base of the tree, half hidden beneath a mass of tangled roots, Arjun spotted something glimmering in the dim light. A large stone, cracked and weathered, with a symbol carved into its surface. It looked like an eye, staring out from the center of the rock. He knelt down, his hands trembling as he reached for it. As his fingers made contact with the stone, he felt a jolt of energy surge through his body, a powerful, almost electric shock that sent a wave of dizziness through his mind. His breath hitched as he pulled the stone free from the roots. Suddenly, the ground beneath him rumbled, and the tree groaned, its massive branches swaying dangerously. Arjun staggered back, clutching the stone in his hands. He could hear the whispers again, louder now, almost deafening. The earth trembled beneath him, and before he could react, the ground split open once more, revealing a dark, yawning chasm that seemed to lead into the very depths of the hill. The air grew thick, suffocating, and the faint light around him flickered and faded. The stone in his hands pulsed with an unnatural energy, almost as if it was alive. Without thinking, Arjun tossed the stone into the chasm. The moment it left his hands, the earth shook violently. The chasm widened, and an eerie, glowing mist began to pour out from the depths, filling the air around him. The whispers grew into a maddening crescendo, and for a moment, Arjun thought he might lose his mind from the intensity of the voices. But then silence. The world around him stilled, and for a brief, fleeting moment, he wondered if he had imagined it all. The mist began to dissipate, and the shadows that had seemed so alive now receded. Arjun stood there, trembling, the stone's glow fading, and the whispers finally silenced. But the weight of what had just occurred was heavy in his chest. He had done something that had triggered a response from the heart of the hill. But what? The ground under his feet had ceased to rumble, but now there was a new presence, one that he couldn't quite place, but that felt familiar. The darkness still clung to the edges of the clearing, but there was a new stillness in the air. He knew the hill had awoken. Something had changed. The curse was not broken. Not yet. But he had found the first clue, the first piece of the puzzle. And now, the search for the sorcerer's last curse had truly begun. Chapter 6. The Hidden Chamber. Arjun's heart was still racing as he stood there, frozen in the eerie silence. The stone had vanished into the chasm, and with it, the immediate threat of the hill's curse seemed to retreat. But the stillness was unnatural, like the calm before a storm. He could feel the weight of the moment hanging over him, an invisible force pressing in from all sides. The whispers had stopped, but the presence of something ancient and malevolent lingered in the air. He took a cautious step back, his feet crunching softly against the moss-covered earth. The massive tree before him loomed like a silent sentinel, its twisted roots now eerily still. The clearing felt different, quieter but also expectant. It was as though the hill itself had noticed his actions, and now it was waiting for him to make his next move. Arjun's mind was spinning. Key. The stone he had thrown into the chasm. Had it truly been the key to breaking the curse? Or had it only been a test, a first step toward something far darker? His hand still clenched at his side, where the stone had once been. He could still feel the pulsing energy from it, like a heartbeat that had once been his own. It was clear now. The Curse of Lonar Hill was far older, far more intricate than he had ever imagined. And it was no accident that it had chosen him. A soft rumble beneath his feet snapped him back to reality. The ground trembled once more, but this time it felt different, stronger, deeper. The chasm in front of him seemed to grow wider, and a faint, unnatural light began to rise from its depths. The earth cracked open even further, revealing an entrance, a narrow, stone-lined passage leading into the darkness below. Arjun swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. The passage was no ordinary tunnel. Its walls were lined with carvings, symbols and runes that seemed to move as he stared at them, shifting like liquid shadows. The air that poured out of the entrance was cold, unnervingly so. His breath fogged before him, and the temperature dropped by several degrees in an instant. The choice was clear. This was the heart of the hill. This was where the curse had begun, and it was the place where it could be stopped. Or perhaps it could be sealed forever. Taking a deep breath, Arjun stepped forward, his boots scraping against the stone as he crossed the threshold. As soon as he entered, the air around him thickened. It was as though the walls themselves were closing in, constricting, trapping him. The faint glow from the chasm illuminated the passage just enough for him to make out the symbols on the walls, but they were so intricate, so foreign, that he couldn't make sense of them. His flashlight flickered back to life, the weak beam cutting through the darkness ahead. The path was narrow, winding deeper into the earth. The further he walked, the more the walls seemed to close in, until the space around him felt almost claustrophobic. He had no choice but to continue, the pull of the mystery and the curse driving him forward. After what felt like hours of winding through the dark passage, Arjun's flashlight finally caught something, an opening up ahead, just barely visible in the dim light. He quickened his pace, the shadows growing long and twisted around him. And then, as he stepped into the large chamber, he stopped dead in his tracks. The room was vast, the ceiling high above him, supported by towering stone pillars covered in more of the same runes and symbols. The air was thick with the scent of decay, but there was something else, an unmistakable feeling of power. The ground beneath him was cracked, uneven, and strewn with ancient debris. But the most striking thing about the chamber was the center. At the heart of the room lay a large stone altar, its surface worn smooth with age. Above it, hanging in midair, was a dark, swirling mist, its shape constantly shifting like a living thing. And beneath the mist, carved into the stone of the altar itself, was a single word: rebirth. Arjun took a tentative step forward, his eyes scanning the chamber. The atmosphere here was suffocating. He could feel it, This was where the curse had been born, and this was where it could be ended. Or, as the voice had said earlier, this was where he could become a part of the story, a part of the curse. The mist above the altar seemed to stir as he moved closer, swirling with increasing intensity. It was as if the chamber itself recognized his presence, as if it were waiting for him. He could feel the weight of the hill bearing down on him, the air thick with the energy of the ages. His breath caught in his throat as the mist began to take shape, forming into a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, with eyes that glowed with an unearthly light. The figure seemed to materialize from the very darkness, its form barely discernible, but Arjun could feel its presence, an overwhelming force that radiated power. "You've come far, traveler," the figure's voice resonated, echoing through the chamber, sending chills down Arjun's spine. "But you have only just begun to understand." Arjun's hands trembled, and he clenched his fists. He had come this far, and now he could not turn back. "I want to end the curse," he said, his voice firm, though he could feel the fear rising in his chest. "Tell me what I need to do." The figure's laugh was low, chilling. "The curse is not something that can simply be ended. It has lived for centuries, fed by the blood of those who sought to understand it. You are just another in a long line of fools who believe they can control what was never meant to be controlled." Arjun's pulse quickened. He had expected resistance, but this was more than he had bargained for. The figure's eyes glowed brighter now, and a ripple of energy surged through the room, causing the walls to tremble. "If you wish to end the curse, you must make a choice," the figure continued. "You must choose life or death. The hill will give you power, but it will take something from you in return." The words hit Arjun like a punch to the stomach. Power. What did it mean by power? And what did it want from him in return? He had no choice. He had come this far. He had to know the truth. With determination, Arjun stepped forward. "I choose to end it. I will do whatever it takes." The figure's form shifted, its eyes burning brighter as a shadowy hand reached out to touch the air. The chamber seemed to hum with dark energy as the mist thickened, swirling faster and faster around Arjun. "You have sealed your fate," the figure whispered. "Now, face the consequences." The world around Arjun began to shift and twist, and he felt himself being pulled into the center of the storm. His body went cold, his mind racing with the weight of what was happening. This was the moment of truth, the moment where the curse would either be lifted or consume him forever. Chapter 7. The Price of Power. The world around Arjun began to unravel. The chamber he had entered, the mist, the figure, all of it dissolved into a violent swirl of dark energy. Time and space no longer seemed to exist as he was pulled deeper into the abyss. He felt himself falling, his body weightless, as though the ground had disappeared entirely. The whispers that had once been faint murmurs now roared in his ears, overwhelming his senses, drowning him in a cacophony of voices. He gasped for breath, but the air was thick, suffocating. His heart raced as he reached out, trying to grab hold of something, anything. But there was nothing. Only darkness. Only the shadows closing in on him. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The world stilled, and Arjun found himself standing in a vast, empty void. The space around him was infinite. There was no horizon, no walls, no floor beneath his feet. It was as if he had been transported to a place beyond reality, a place where nothing existed but him and the overwhelming force that had brought him here. And then the figure appeared again. It materialized before him, its form still cloaked in shadow, its eyes glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Arjun's breath caught in his throat. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that it was all a dream, that none of this was real. But it was real. The curse was real. And now, he was standing face to face with the source of it. "You came seeking power," the figure's voice echoed in the void, its tone dark, almost pitying. "But you did not understand the price. None of you ever do." Arjun's hands were shaking, his thoughts scrambled. "I didn't come for power," he managed to say, his voice trembling. "I came to end the curse. To stop it from claiming more lives." The figure tilted its head, as if considering his words. "And yet you stand here, drawn to the very heart of it. Drawn to the power that has been sealed for centuries." The figure's voice grew colder, more distant. "Do you truly believe you can break the cycle? Do you think you can end what has existed longer than any mortal could fathom?" Arjun's pulse thudded in his ears. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The figure was right. He had been seeking answers, but now he saw that he had underestimated the curse. It wasn't just a story. It wasn't just a dark legend. It was a living force, and he was part of it now. "I have to stop it," Arjun said, his voice firm. "I won't let this curse claim more lives." The figure chuckled, a sound that sent chills down his spine. "You think you have a choice. You are already bound to it, traveler. The hill has claimed you. You will never leave, not truly. Not unscathed." The air around Arjun seemed to ripple, and suddenly, images flashed before his eyes. Horrific, fragmented images. Visions of those who had come before him, their faces twisted in agony as they disappeared into the hill's grasp. There were others. So many others who had tried to end the curse, only to become part of it, trapped in its endless cycle. Arjun's knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, the weight of the truth crushing him. The curse wasn't something that could simply be broken. It was an ancient force, alive and aware, feeding on those who dared to challenge it. And now he was no different. He had become part of its story. The figure loomed above him, its eyes burning brighter, and the mist that swirled around them seemed to grow darker, denser, as if it was feeding off his despair. The figure extended its hand toward him, and Arjun instinctively recoiled, but the air grew heavy, pulling him closer. "Do you understand now?" the figure whispered, its voice low and ominous. "You sought the key, but it was never a key to freedom. It was the key to your own destruction." Arjun's throat tightened as the figure's words sank in. The stone he had thrown into the chasm, it hadn't ended anything. It had only opened the door to something far worse. The figure's hand came closer, and suddenly, Arjun felt a burning sensation deep within his chest. It was like fire searing through his veins, filling every part of him with an intense, pulsing heat. His vision blurred as he gasped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Now you will understand," the figure said, its voice now a low hum, vibrating through Arjun's very soul. "The curse is not a thing, it is a force. It is life and death intertwined. And you, Arjun, will carry it with you. Forever." With a final, deafening rush of power, the burning sensation surged through Arjun, and the world around him seemed to explode in a blinding flash of light. When his vision cleared, Arjun found himself back in the chamber. The mist was gone, the air still and heavy. The altar remained unchanged, but he felt different. The weight of the curse pressed down on him, but now it was a part of him, He could feel it pulsing within him, an unrelenting dark presence that would never leave. The figure had vanished, but its words remained, echoing in his mind. You will carry it with you, forever. Arjun staggered to his feet, his head spinning. The room was unchanged, but everything had shifted. The walls felt closer, the shadows deeper. He had failed. The curse was still alive. But he was different now. He wasn't just a witness to its power anymore. He was part of it. The whispers returned, soft at first, but growing louder as he stumbled toward the altar. The stone that had been the source of the curse pulsed faintly beneath his touch. Arjun realized now that the key wasn't to break the curse. The key was to accept it, to become a part of it. He didn't know what had happened to him, but one thing was certain. The curse had claimed him, just as it had claimed all the others before him. He had made his choice. And now he would have to live with the consequences. Chapter 8. The Shifting Reality. Arjun stumbled out of the chamber, the weight of the curse settling like an unbearable mantle on his shoulders. The path that had once seemed so clear now felt endless, a labyrinth with no escape. His mind raced, unable to reconcile the words of the figure with the reality around him. He had come here with a singular purpose, to break the curse. But now, the very essence of the curse seemed to have merged with him. There was no going back. The forest had changed too. Where there had once been a calm, almost serene atmosphere, now the trees stood tall and ominous, their branches twisting like gnarled hands reaching for him. The air was thick with something he couldn't quite place. Tension, maybe. A subtle yet profound change that he could feel in his bones. It was as if the entire forest was alive, watching him, waiting. The whispers that had faded for a moment after he left the chamber began again, this time louder, clearer, like voices just beneath the surface of his thoughts. They weren't the voices of the past adventurers. They were his own thoughts, twisted and warped by the power he had absorbed. The curse had infected him, mind and soul, and with it came the unsettling realization that he was no longer the person who had entered the hill. He tried to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't be silenced. You belong here now. You cannot leave. He blinked, but when he opened his eyes, the forest around him had shifted. The trees weren't where they had been before. The path he had walked so many times felt unfamiliar. A subtle sense of dread gripped him. How long had he been walking? What had happened to time while he was in the chamber? The world itself seemed to bend and warp, shifting in and out of focus, as though it were not real, but a dream, or worse, a nightmare. The ground beneath his feet felt uneven, and shadows moved at the edge of his vision, shifting like living things. It was as though the curse had tainted the very fabric of reality, and now it was warping everything around him. Arjun stopped. He had to regain control, but how? The power from the altar had infiltrated every part of him, and now it was leaking into the world itself. He closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to steady his mind. He had to think. The hill. The curse. It was all connected. He had felt the pull to the altar, the unnatural draw to take on the curse, but why? Why had the figure said that the curse was not something that could be broken, only accepted? The answer was elusive, slipping away whenever he tried to grasp it. Then he heard a voice, not his own but someone else's. A voice that sent chills running through him, one he had heard before in his dreams. You cannot escape. You never could. Arjun froze. That voice. It was the voice of the sorcerer, the one who had first cast the curse centuries ago. He could feel its presence in the air, thick with power. It was all around him, suffocating. It was not just a voice, it was an echo, a presence that permeated everything. You were always meant to become part of it, Arjun. You were the final piece of the puzzle. The world around him began to twist and shift again, the trees bending at unnatural angles, the ground beneath his feet rumbling. A dark fog rolled in from the edges of the forest, swirling and coiling like a serpent. Arjun took a step back, his eyes darting around, but there was nowhere to run. The curse had already claimed him, and now it was starting to claim the world. He reached out for something to steady himself, anything. His hand touched the bark of a tree, but the moment he made contact, the wood beneath his fingers shifted, becoming something different. Cold, damp stone. He pulled his hand away quickly, eyes wide, his heart pounding in his chest. It was as though the very forest was becoming something else, something darker, something alive. Arjun gasped as the stone wall in front of him seemed to solidify, rising from the earth, its surface covered in the same ancient runes he had seen in the chamber. They were glowing now, pulsating with a dark energy. A doorway had opened in the stone, a passage leading deep beneath the hill. He was no longer in control of where he was. The curse was dragging him down a path he could not escape. Every step he took seemed to pull him deeper into its grip. With a sinking feeling in his chest, Arjun stepped toward the passage. As he moved closer, the whispers grew louder, their voices no longer distant but inside his mind, filling him with a sense of inevitability. He had to go through it. There was no other choice. But as he crossed the threshold, something inside him screamed to stop. This was it, the point of no return. He had crossed into the heart of the hill. Inside, the passage was cold and damp, the walls lined with strange symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air felt thick, as though the weight of centuries of darkness had settled here. And yet Arjun felt no fear. He was beyond that now. Fear had already been consumed by the curse. He walked down the narrow passage, his steps echoing through the silence. And then, just as he thought he could take no more, the tunnel opened into a massive chamber, even more ancient and foreboding than the one before. The walls here were covered with tapestries depicting scenes of great battles, sacrifices, and strange rituals, each one more grotesque than the last. In the center of the room stood a large, weathered stone pedestal, its surface slick with age and shadow. A figure stood before it, shrouded in dark robes, its face hidden by a mask that glowed with an unnatural light. "Welcome, Arjun," the figure intoned, its voice rich and resonant. "I have been waiting for you." Arjun felt a chill run down his spine, and though he wanted to step back, his feet were frozen in place. The figure stepped forward, its mask gleaming in the dim light. "You are the one who has been chosen," the figure continued. "You are the one who will unlock the true power of the curse. But to do so, you must make the ultimate choice." Arjun swallowed hard. The weight of the moment was overwhelming. The curse had brought him here, had chosen him. But what choice was left? He stepped forward, his mind racing. "What must I do?" The figure extended its hand, pointing toward the pedestal. "Touch it, Arjun. Touch it, and the power will be yours. But know this, once you do, you will not be the same. You will be bound to the hill forever. And you will carry its curse for all eternity." Arjun hesitated. He knew the cost. He could feel it in his bones. But what other choice did he have? Could he break the curse? Or would he become part of it like all the others before him? He reached forward, his hand trembling as it hovered above the pedestal. Chapter 9. The Choice of the Damned. The stone pedestal in front of Arjun seemed to pulse with a dark energy, drawing him in, urging him to make the decision that would seal his fate. His hand hovered just above it, the air thick with an oppressive silence that pressed down on him from all sides. The figure before him stood motionless, its mask gleaming with that unnatural light, its eyes, or what should have been eyes, seeming to bore into his soul. Arjun could feel the curse inside him, swirling with intensity. It was no longer just a presence, it was part of him, embedded in his very thoughts. The whispers had become a constant murmur in the back of his mind, a chorus of voices, each one urging him to take the final step. It felt like the hill was alive, like it was breathing, pulsating with a hunger that he could never truly understand. He had already given so much. He had come here to stop the curse, to end it, to free himself and everyone it had consumed. But now he stood at the precipice of the most important choice of his life. Would he give in to the power, sealing his place as the latest victim of the hill, or would he resist, knowing that the price of resistance might be the loss of everything he ever loved? The figure's voice broke the silence again, its tone calm, but laced with an undeniable sense of finality. You understand what must be done. You are no longer the man who came here. You are something more, something darker. The curse is a part of you now, has chosen you, but the power it offers comes at a cost. You will have dominion over the hill, control over its curse. But you will be its keeper. For eternity. Arjun's heart pounded in his chest, the words sinking in like a heavy stone. He had come seeking an answer, seeking a way to destroy the curse. But now, standing in the heart of the hill, he understood the truth. There was no destroying it. Not really. The curse was eternal. It had always existed, fed by the lives of those who sought to end it, and it would continue to exist long after he was gone. The only way to control it, to put an end to its reign over the innocent, was to become a part of it, to wield its power. The pedestal's surface was cold to the touch, but beneath the chill, there was a deep warmth that radiated from it. Raw, potent power. Arjun's fingers brushed the stone, and a surge of energy shot through him. It was like nothing he had ever felt before. His body burned with an overwhelming force, and for a brief moment, he felt the weight of all the curses before him, the weight of the souls that had been trapped by the hill. Their pain, their fear, their darkness, it all rushed through him, merging with his own. He staggered back, his breath shallow, as the chamber seemed to twist around him. The air grew thick, oppressive, as though the very walls were closing in. The whispers grew louder, no longer just voices in the back of his mind, but a chorus that filled the entire space. It was overwhelming, suffocating. But then, in the midst of it all, something shifted. A vision flashed before his eyes. His family, his friends, the people he cared about, all safe, untouched by the curse. He could see their faces, their smiles, their lives. They were free. Free from the curse that had haunted the hill for centuries. It was like a beacon of hope, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness that had consumed him. Arjun closed his eyes, breathing deeply, trying to center himself. This is it, he thought. The moment of truth. The choice that will define everything. The figure before him spoke again, its voice low, like a whisper from the deepest shadows. What will you choose, Arjun? Will you accept the power? Will you become the keeper of the curse, the one who controls it, bends it to your will? Or will you reject it, knowing that the consequences will be far worse? The curse will consume everything you hold dear. It will spread beyond this hill, beyond this world. It will destroy everything in its path. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, suffocating him. His mind raced. He could feel the power in his bones, in his soul. He could feel it tempting him, offering him control, dominion over the curse. It would be his. He would be the master, the one who could bend it to his will, the one who could end the suffering or at least control it. But what if he failed? What if the curse consumed him, as it had consumed so many others? What if his actions only caused more suffering, more pain, more lives lost? Arjun's hand tightened around the pedestal as the decision tore at him. His chest felt tight, his heart racing. But then something inside him snapped. He couldn't do it. He couldn't become the very thing he had sworn to destroy. He couldn't let the curse continue to spread, continue to devour everything it touched. The lives of those he loved, the people who had no choice but to fall victim to this ancient evil, they deserved better. He had come here to stop it, and he wasn't going to let the curse win. With a deep breath, Arjun stepped back from the pedestal. The whispers faltered for a moment, and the figure's mask seemed to shimmer, as though in disbelief. You reject the power. The voice was incredulous, a mixture of disdain and surprise. Do you truly believe that you can leave here unscathed? Do you believe you can stop what has existed for centuries with nothing but willpower? Arjun's body was shaking, but his resolve was unwavering. He knew what the consequences would be. The hill would not let him go easily. The curse would fight back with everything it had. But he would not succumb to it. Not now, not ever. I will not be the keeper of this curse, he said. His voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. I will find another way. Even if it costs me everything, I will end it. The figure before him let out a low, mocking laugh. You fool, it whispered. You cannot break the curse. It is a part of you now. It always was. But Arjun refused to listen. With one last, defiant breath, he turned and ran, not knowing what would happen next. The curse was screaming at him, clawing at his soul, but he was determined. He would fight this. He would end it. But as he ran through the chamber, the walls began to shift. The passage he had come through was gone, replaced by an infinite darkness. The path ahead was obscured, and the weight of the curse, of the hill itself, pressed down on him. Arjun could feel the curse tightening around him, dragging him down into the darkness. His footsteps faltered, but he kept running. The whispers had turned to screams, but still he ran. He had made his choice. And now he would face the consequences. Chapter 10. The Final Descent. Arjun's legs were burning as he sprinted through the shifting darkness. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and resolve, each step taking him deeper into a labyrinth he couldn't see, yet somehow knew. The whispers, the voices that had been tormenting him for so long, were now screams, wailing in agony, in fury. The hill was fighting him, pulling at his very soul, trying to drag him back to where it wanted him to stay. The path had disappeared. There were no walls, no guiding markers, just an endless stretch of blackness, as if the very ground beneath his feet was swallowing him whole. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart thundering in his chest, but he could not stop. He would not stop. I must finish this, he thought. Have no other choice. His thoughts kept racing back to the figure in the chamber, the one that had tried to make him embrace the curse. It had told him that there was no escape, that the curse was not just an ancient force but something far older, far more powerful than he had ever imagined. It had claimed countless others, and now it had claimed him. But he could still feel that small spark of defiance inside him, a flame that refused to be extinguished by the darkness. As he pushed on, the world around him seemed to pulse with a sickening rhythm. The air grew colder, colder still, until it felt like it was cutting through him, freezing him from the inside out. The weight of the curse was unbearable now, as though invisible chains were tightening around his chest, each breath coming slower, heavier, until it felt like he was drowning in the cold. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet trembled violently, throwing him off balance. He crashed to the ground, his palms scraping against the cold stone, his heart racing with panic. Above him, the darkness seemed to spiral, coiling like a storm ready to consume everything in its path. He struggled to his feet, his legs unsteady beneath him, his head spinning. The whispers reached a fever pitch now, deafening in their intensity. But in the midst of the cacophony, he heard something else, something that stood apart from the shrieks of torment. A voice, calm and yet filled with deep, unfathomable sorrow. It is not just power you rejected, Arjun. It is life itself. Arjun's heart stopped, and he froze in place. He knew that voice. It was the voice of the sorcerer, the one who had bound the curse to the hill all those centuries ago. It wasn't just a voice from the past. It was the essence of the curse itself, speaking to him now, reaching across time to remind him of the fate he had chosen. You think you can outrun the curse. You think you can fight it. But it will never leave you. Not now. Not ever. It is within you, Arjun. You are the curse now. The ground beneath him shifted again, and he looked down in horror as the stone cracked and broke, fissures spreading outward like veins in a dying body. The air hummed with a low, menacing energy. He was sinking into it, into the curse itself. The last remnants of defiance within him wavered. Was it true? Was he truly no longer the person who had entered the hill, who had walked the forest seeking to destroy the curse? Had he already become part of the very evil he had sworn to end? No, he couldn't accept that. Not yet. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to escape the curse, to stop it from consuming everything he cared about. With renewed desperation, Arjun staggered forward, forcing his legs to move, his feet sinking deeper with every step. The darkness seemed to reach out like hands clawing at him, dragging him down, but he pushed against it, his body trembling with the effort. He would not be consumed. Not yet. Not until he had tried everything. He looked around, hoping for a glimpse of something, anything that would show him a way out. And then, his eyes locked onto something ahead of him, a faint, flickering light in the distance. It was soft at first, like a distant star, but it grew brighter with every passing second. He took a deep breath and started toward it, each step feeling like an eternity. The darkness recoiled, the whispers quieting, as though the very presence of the light was enough to push back the curse. The closer he got, the more it felt like the darkness itself was afraid, like it was losing its grip on him. Finally, he reached the light, and in that moment, everything around him seemed to dissolve. The darkness, the pressure, the suffocating weight of the curse, all of it disappeared, leaving only the light. He stepped forward, his heart racing with anticipation. And then, in an instant, everything changed. The light engulfed him, and Arjun felt his body fall through the air, his senses spiraling into a state of pure confusion. It was as if the very fabric of time and space had twisted and broken, leaving him floating in an endless void. The sensation was overwhelming, but just as quickly as it had begun, it stopped. Arjun's feet hit solid ground once more, and he found himself standing in a familiar place. His village. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and the sounds of life filled the air. It was peaceful, serene. He looked around, his heart heavy with 1,000 questions. He had come here to end the curse. But now he wasn't sure if it had ended or if it had only taken on a new form. Was he free? Or had the curse followed him, hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to resurface? And more than that, he felt a gnawing emptiness inside him, like a part of him had been lost, like something was missing. The weight of the curse was no longer physical, but he could still feel it deep inside. As he walked through the village, he saw familiar faces, people he had known, people who had been lost to the curse. They were alive. They were happy. But were they truly free? Or were they living under the shadow of the curse, unknowingly bound by its eternal grip? Arjun stopped in his tracks, the realization sinking in. The curse was not just something to be defeated. It was something that existed in all things, in every person, in every choice. Could never be fully erased. It could only be fought against, day by day, moment by moment. The curse had not been destroyed. It had merely changed. And Arjun had become part of that change. The journey was far from over.